I love history. In undergrad, I actually was a history major. And one thing that you learn being a history major in undergrad is that you're going to have to go get a master's degree because there's not much you can do with that degree. So I went to seminary. And when I was in seminary, I was very excited for my first history class, Church History 501, the beginning of the church to the Reformation. Now, yeah, it's a big survey. Now, I learned something very important in that class. What I learned was this: professors make and break classes. It could be the topic that you least want to study, but if the professor is enthusiastic about it, they can captivate you and actually develop a passion in you for that material. On the other hand, it could be something that you're very interested in, and the professor could kill that desire from you. And you might just be wondering what sin you committed in a past life that this punishment of sitting through this class has put you in. Needless to say, if you mention any one of the church fathers outside of Augustine or Eusebius, you're going to have to fill me in the context. Because professors make and break classes. Now, perhaps you haven't experienced this with the professor, but you've experienced it with a job. Bosses make and break jobs. Or perhaps a coach on a team, right? That coach will make and break your experience as a team. My question for us is, if professors make and break classes, if bosses make and break jobs, if coaches make and break teams, do pastors make and break churches? As Christian leaders, what impact do we have on the faith journey of our people? Are we responsible for the quality and longevity of their faith? The title of my sermon this afternoon is Lead Like Someone Else's Life Depends on It. Now, of course, there are many aspects of Christian leadership, and this is not all-inclusive. But the focus of our passage here today is pretty simple, and here's the argument I want us to see. Godly leaders preserve life. And we're going to see in this passage, David and Saul are contrasted. And so the natural implication of this truth, that godly leaders preserve life, is that ungodly leaders become destroyers of it. This comparing and contrasting of David and Saul breaks our text up pretty easily. First, we have this portrait of the godly leader in verses 1 through 5, and second, portrait of an ungodly leader in 6 through 19. So first, a portrait of a godly leader. At this point, this is the hardest part in David's life. He's being hunted by Saul and he's in hiding. While he's hiding from Saul, we see in verse 1 that his family comes down to him. Undoubtedly, David's family was also in danger. If Saul couldn't find David, I'm sure he was going to be looking for them. And so in verse 3, David takes them to Moab to secure their protection. In this case, preserving life looks like actual literal protection. Now, of course, as the leaders, we want to be preserving and protecting the lives of our people as well. Most likely, it's not going to be from a mad tyrant. But make no mistake about it, there are dangers out there that face our people. There are dangers that are lurking, looking to destroy their lives and their souls. And most certainly, if we're to be godly leaders, we must take it upon ourselves to protect our flocks from those dangers. It could be steering people away from sin. It could be pointing out erroneous teaching. It could be pointing out blind spots that our culture has or that us as individuals have. There might not be some mad king that's looking to physically overpower our people, but there is a lion who's looking for someone to devour. And if we're godly leaders, we got to keep in mind that that danger is out there, not downplay it, not just lovingly, tenderly care for our sheep, but vigilantly protect them. Godly leadership is taking responsibility for our people's safety. But it isn't just this family of David that we see. There's also this other group that shows up in verse 2. And it's the outcasts of the society of that day that flock to David. Those who haven't fared too well in the current kingdom. At surface level, we might call them the burnouts and losers. This is the collection that flocks to David. Yet, interestingly, they're not coming to David because their lives are in danger. Not physical, immediate danger, anyway. Instead, they're coming to David because their lives are in shambles. For some, perhaps it was their own wrong choices, foolish choices, that led to this position. Perhaps for others, it wasn't actually unwise choices that they made with their lives, but the wrongdoings that they had happened to them at the hands of other people. Most likely, as it almost is always the case for us as humans, some combination of both. Either way, these people have largely been disvalued and deemed unworthy in their current contexts, and they're looking for something new. I don't know about you, that doesn't sound like life to me. And they gathered to David, knowing that somehow being a part of what God is doing through this new leader that he's raising up, somehow being a part of this group of people that is coming together around him, it's going to be for their well-being. It will cause their lives to flourish where it seems they've only been withering. Now, David could have easily dismissed these people. I mean, he didn't have to take them in. It's clear that he has enough on his plate. Who would want the responsibility of 400 more? That's not what he does. He doesn't toss them aside like the rest of the society seems to have. He becomes their leader. And in fact, we see exactly how David feels about this ragtag group in Psalm 52:9. It's written about these specific episodes recorded for us in 1 Samuel 22. And he thanks God, and he says in Psalm 52:9, I will wait for God in the presence of the godly. This is how he describes them. He's thankful for them, that they are with him. These might not have been the world's top choices, but David seems to see what nobody else does, their value. I imagine that this became the first time in a long time for some of these men that they felt like they belonged. Probably the first time in a while that they felt like they had worth, that they had something to contribute of meaning to a community. This idea of value, worth, contribution, isn't that the quality of life we would like to see in our people? They might not be in immediate danger, but there's an enrichment to life that comes from leaders valuing their people. There is this sense of fullness and belonging that comes when leaders care well for their people. I know as pastors, sometimes we can jokingly dismiss the sheep. I feel like especially when we get all together, you guys aren't hearing this on this side of the room, when we get all together, it becomes somewhat of a contest of whose sheep are stupider. And again, there needs to be a certain element in which we can share our experiences. We have a unique job, and we do need to be able to talk about with other pastors in safety and who understand the life of a pastor, what's going on. But I would venture to say that sometimes we go too far with it. And it's clear that we don't actually value the sheep, simply based on how we talk about them. David values his sheep, and so should we. This is the portrait we get of a godly leader. They preserve life by protecting it and by adding value and worth to those that are in their care. As godly leaders, let's not shirk this call, but make sure we take the responsibility for the well-being of our people. And this is what we see a godly leader looks like. And as we continue, we see a portrait of an ungodly leader in verse 6 through 19. Now Saul, on the other hand, he's not like David. He's not hiding in some cave. he's sitting pretty, or so it seems, on the surface. He's in his hometown. He's got all his best men around him. And as they gather, he blows a gasket. Look, we've all been there before when the boss or coach calls everybody in and just starts laying into everybody. Perhaps we've actually been that leader who's doing that. Those tirades are never fun when the boss is just looking for anyone and everyone to pour his anger into. In verse 7, Saul plays the perks card. Look at all the benefits and the riches and positions of power I have and can give you. Is that shepherd boy going to give you guys all that? He's trying to coerce their unwavering loyalty. And it's not much of an offer of genuine life, but here are some perks to stick with me. In a fit of rage, Saul quickly pivots in verse 8. He starts accusing everyone and everything. He's not just questioning their actions, he's going at their motives. He's even attacking his own son. He looks a lot like Macbeth here. His desire to hold on to power is beginning to drive him mad. He sees conspiracies everywhere. Everyone's out to get him and everyone is in on it. Now, from our perspective, reading it on the page, it might be easy to dismiss the gravity of this moment. Saul could come off as a child just having a temper tantrum. But he's still king. He has immense raw power here. Fewer things more deadly and threatening than power that's consumed by anger. Doeg the Edomite, he sees the opportunity though, so he provides information about David's whereabouts. Now, he talks about what the events that transpired in chapter 21. David had gone to the priest Ahimelech, and the Edomite, Doeg, had seen him. Now, David goes to Ahimelech, and he actually lies to him. He approaches him looking for shelter, and he tells him that he is there on king's business, when in reality, David's there because he's hiding from the king. So Saul sends somebody to go and get Ahimelech. In verse 14, we see that Ahimelech is standing up to this questioning, saying, look, I don't know anything about everything that's going on between you and David. I was just doing what I've always done. I've always answered inquiries. I've always done this provision thing. And Saul doesn't care. He's completely callous. He orders the death of him and his whole family. We've gone from offering perks, demanding loyalty, questioning everyone's motivation, to wrath being poured out. All just trying to preserve his kingdom. And at this point, even his men are like, this is going too far. Everyone takes a step back. Like, nope, I am not willing to go that far for you to hold on to this kingdom. But of course, Doeg, our opportunist, sees the chance to earn even more favor, so he goes and slaughters everyone and everything. This moment should give us pause. How did it come to this? I mean, this is the king of Israel, the one who was supposed to deliver the people, and now he's destroying them. And of course, it's easy to look at this portrait and say we never would. I'm willing to bet that, yes, you and I will never order the execution of a bunch of priests. But it's important to remember that Saul wasn't always like what we see in chapter 22. Chapter 10, Saul's publicly being chosen. He actually hides. He doesn't want to be king. He doesn't want power. He's not seeking it, so he hides in chapter 10. I don't honestly believe that many of us get into ministry because of power. I believe most of us have good intentions. I truly do. Misguided at times, most certainly, but good intentions nonetheless. But if we've learned anything from studying history, it's, oh, how power corrupts. Will we be the type of leaders who seek to preserve our little kingdoms and don't care how many bodies we stack up in the process of doing so? In the name of mission and vision of our church, how many people will we throw off that bus and run over with it? When we begin to see people as the means to an end in our ministry, rather than the people as the end of our ministry, it's time for us to take a step back. Again, probably not going to be ordering executions, but will we demand unwavering loyalty and offer perks to those under us? Will we twist and manipulate people's motives so that the problem's always with them, it's never with us? God forbid we start to cross ethical lines and ask other people to do so. All in the name of the kingdom, of course, though. In our anger, will it boil over to rage that lashes out to those under us? It's not the raw power of a king, but make no mistake about it, gentlemen, we do hold power. The power to do great damage with our words and our actions and decisions as leaders. Take that seriously and lead well, because someone else's life depends on it. Oh, and by the way, Saul's life and our lives depended on it as well. We get this little detail of a tamarisk tree. You know the only other time we see that in 1 Samuel? The last verse of the book. They bury Saul's body under it. The author's foreshadowing how Saul's disregard for human life, his self-centered kingship, it's only going to end in his disgrace and death. In David, we see the portrait of a godly leader. Conversely, in Saul, we see the portrait of an ungodly leader. One serves the people, one serves himself. One's focused on the good of the people, one on his own gain. One seeks to preserve life. One seeks to preserve his kingdom. Can't help but think of what Jesus says in John 10. The thief comes to kill and destroy. I can come to give life, and that they might have it abundantly. Now, obviously, we don't give life in the way that Jesus did and does. But as pastors, we can make and break the faith and the journey of those that are under our care. Our words, ministries, actions, relationships, decisions, they will all either give or steal life from our people. They'll either preserve life or destroy it. Those are the two camps. But let's also acknowledge that despite our best efforts and intentions to be godly leaders who are genuinely seeking to take responsibility of the well-being of our people, sometimes we fall short. In fact, to close this story, the author returns to the portrait of a godly leader, verse 20 to 23. But it's a godly leader who's fallen short. There's one priest, Abiathar, who escapes and makes it to David. And here we have David taking the responsibility of the deaths of Abiathar's family. He sees not being up front with Ahimelech back in 21 as now being the cause that gave Saul the reason to do this heinous act. Because Ahimelech, he didn't know what was actually at stake. And so he aids David, and in so doing, he put himself and his entire family in danger. Now, certainly David isn't the one who pulled the trigger. I'm not saying that. But I am saying, look at David's own words. He takes responsibility for it, for his actions, for the lie that in some way sent forth this motion of events that ends in this tragedy. Even though it wasn't his intention, David is owning the impact of his actions. In this sense, David, like Saul, actually becomes a destroyer of life, not one who preserves it. Unlike Saul, who in chapters 13 and 15, when faced with his own sin, makes excuses, David makes no excuse. He completely owns it. In our ministries, there will be times when we hurt people. when we take rather than give life. That's a fact. It's guaranteed. Hopefully it's rare and never intentional, but our sharp tongue might get the best of us. Our impatience, condescension, forgetfulness, whatever your vice is going to do its damage. And in the process, the very people that we are called to love and shepherd will be the ones that we hurt the most. It's not a question of if it happens, but only when. So the question then becomes for us, when we are faced with this reality of these people that are in our care that we have hurt, will we try to defend ourselves, or will we try to mend what we have broken? Will we give excuses? Will we point to circumstances and motivations to justify our behavior? Because if you really want to cause some damage in your people and sow distrust, just double down on how you wronged them. If you want to preserve them, I suggest you die to your pride and your ego. This is what David does. He owns his wrongs, and then he invites Abiathar to stay with him for safety. This is what godly leaders do. This is what pastors, shepherds of the flock, do. And ultimately, we do it having the example of Christ, the Good Shepherd, who lays down his life for the flock. Of course, he's not owning his own sin, the damage that he's caused to others, but ours. And in so doing, he invites us to come and stay with him in safety, not having to worry about somebody coming along and paying us back for our sin, because that has been covered before a just and holy God. This is the upside down nature of the gospel and of the kingdom of God. Its leaders are always dying to preserve the life of its people. Jesus didn't do it for himself. He did it because our lives depended on it. And in grace, may Jesus preserve us so that we might preserve life in those under our care. Amen.